Hello. I'm going to go ahead and get started here speaking about winning campaigns, if I can get order. Hello, my name is Apollo Pazell, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Libertarian National Committee on winning elections and how to get that done. So, a little bit about myself. I'm an elected Libertarian based out of Copperton. I'm currently the Vice Mayor of Copperton. I also serve on the Board of Directors for Unified Police Department. It's one of the largest police departments in the Western United States. There we go. Okay. My day job is I work as a political consultant. I train candidates on how to win elections. Previously, I come from the Democratic Party and then the Republican Party until I finally found my home as a Libertarian. Very happy to be here. And after many years of advocating, so 2012 was when I first got involved in the Libertarian Party, and after those few years of advocating, I was finally allowed to try to pull some of the strategies that I've learned from. I'll keep those up here. Try to implement some of the strategies that I've learned from the Republican and Democratic side and the Libertarian side. And when I was hired on as the campaign advisor for the National Party. When I first took the job, we were all under the impression that the Libertarian Party had to be extremely different in the way that we presented ourselves in campaigns. Politics is a science. Campaigning is a science. And it's basically, it's formulaic. You replace the variables in the formula and you run a campaign. At least in the Democratic and Republican areas, that's how it was done. You plug in your win number, you plug in your persuasion universe, you plug in your data, and you basically have the strategy built for you. The idea that we had as Libertarian or consultants coming into the Libertarian Party is that it had to be different because we were dealing with such a large persuasion universe. And I'll talk about what a persuasion universe is and how to find it in a little bit. But when we were able to implement the strategies last year on a local level, just try to do some controls and some tests on what the Libertarian Party can do to try to win elections, we found out that it was not a matter of much different than what the Republicans and Democrats do when it comes to campaigning. It's just the volume in which we have to do it because of our persuasion universe. So that's what we're doing this year, is trying to craft a more direct approach to campaigning for Libertarians on a local level. I am not one to try to incrementally push the Libertarian Party over the edge. I'm the kind of person that really I want to see victories, and I want to see them now. I believe that the incremental change is actually getting elected. And last year we were able to identify at least one race, but there were many races that broke records. Bethany Baldez is the campaign that we were able to implement the best strategies in on a partisan level. Of course, you have Jeff Hewitt locally, but that was a nonpartisan race. Bethany broke records as the highest percentage gained by a Libertarian partisan candidate for State House. She received 49% of the vote. Technically, it was at one point the Associated Press called the race for her until the county clerk of Fremont County found a bag of 500 ballots that were counted, and she lost by 63 votes. So she received about 49.6%. It's a little bit cloudy. And it was based solely off of an incredibly hard-fought campaign. But one thing that we know on the Democratic and Republican side of things is door knocking is obviously key. That's what we need to do. But with the Libertarian side, so what a Democrat and a Republican will do is they'll identify a persuasion universe. A persuasion universe is how many voters you need to get to that 50% plus one. Democrats and Republicans have a very small persuasion universe because they have a very large base. 50% of people are registered. Well, usually not, but you have 50% of voters that are voting for Democrats, 50% of voters that are voting Republican. We only have 1 to 3%, so we have our persuasion universe that's 97% versus the Democrat and Republican, which is 2 or 3%. So we have the inverse problem. So the theory is that we had to put a lot more into it, but as it turned out, we didn't really. So there's another race that we were able to control, and that was Amber Beltran's race out in Utah. And what we did was we had Bethany knock every door in her district 3 times. We had Amber's district divided into 3 different categories. We had one city where we knocked 1 time. We had one city in her district where we knocked 2 times. And we had one city in her district where we knocked 3 times with consistent messaging. In the areas that we only knocked the doors one time, our Libertarian candidate got between 1 and 3% on average in those precincts. In the areas that we knocked 2 times, she jumped to 18%. In the areas that we knocked 3 times, she was averaging 32%. So the reality for the Libertarians is we don't just knock once, unlike the Democrats and the Republicans. We have to knock multiple times. You have to speak, or you have to have meaningful conversations with your delegates multiple times to be able to see that needle change in a significant way to actually make those wins. A good way to do that is just looking at this from a percentage basis. Studies have shown that if you knock on 13 doors, you're on average to be you can expect to gain 1 vote. So every 13 doors that you knock, you can get 1 vote. Again, that comes back to our persuasion universe, where Libertarians' persuasion is they have to knock on thousands of doors, where Democrats only have to knock on hundreds of doors. I'm using Democrats because we're in California. So it's important that you know your persuasion number. How to find that is I've already covered that. I'm sorry, I've got to see my notes. I was expecting a podium here. So what we need to do, first of all, what I'm going to cover is evaluating your races. I've been asked here in California to talk to you guys about how you can do what we did on the national level locally. California is up against some pretty insurmountable odds. The costs of your elections are, for an example, is the cost that was spent, or the amount of money that was spent on the presidential election in Wyoming was about as much as was spent on one single state senatorial election in Wyoming, or in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So you guys are up against some pretty high odds. Which is unfortunate, but you also have access to more fundraising. So you need to find areas in California where you can actually find a win. That means lower win numbers, lower costs. And the best place to do that, from what I was able to evaluate, is probably Northern California in the state of Jefferson area or the Humboldt County area. Those are the areas where you're probably going to have the easiest time finding some victories. Once you've identified the areas where you have the smallest win numbers, the smallest costs, you need to identify candidates who have a strong tie to those communities. You need members of Lions clubs, church organizations, things like that. You need to go out and actively recruit people who have connections to your communities. That's because ground game is the most powerful tool that we have as candidates, and the best way to get the ground game going is by connecting with the people in your community to be able to go and make that ground game happen. So it's very important that the candidates that you have are connected with the community. Your biggest victory that you've ever seen with Jeff Hewitt was largely in part because of his connections to the community. Serving as mayor obviously helped quite a bit, but his connections to the community as a businessman, his connections to the community through his own personal endeavors, taking a lot of time. I'm not even sure how much personal revenue was lost with Jeff interacting with his community. It's a big sacrifice. So when you are finding your candidates, you need people who are very, very connected to their communities. You need to know the history of your district. You need to know the how much money it costs for your opponents to win. You need to know what issues that they were able to put together and to form a coalition to get to that 50% plus one. That means that you can't just find a paper candidate who lives in their basement who says, yeah, I'm going to go run for this person. If you really want to win that, you need to know the history and have somebody who can identify with that history and communicate the issues in that local area effectively. Because you're a Libertarian, the cost of the win is going to be higher than the cost of the win for the Democrats and Republicans. It's just the case, because you have to do so much more, which you do. We are Libertarians, we have to work hard. We can do it, but unfortunately that's the reality. So when you do identify your costs, which of course is taking the last 5 election cycles and averaging out the cost for the person that won, you're going to want to go about 30% higher for your fundraising goals. That's what we were able to find. It costs about 30% more to achieve the victories using traditional strategies for a Libertarian than it does for a Democrat or a Republican. Once you've found the history and put together the plan for your communities, once you've recruited the candidate, the very next thing that you need to do is getting involved locally if you haven't already. There's a very interesting book. It's very dry, but it's very informative. If you really want to learn how to engage a community, it's called Bowling Alone. It's a political science staple. If you ever take political science classes, many people will ask you to, your professors will ask you to read Bowling Alone. It talks about the decline of organizations, civic organizations like Lions clubs, Elks lodges, and things like that, which has shifted the resources in a political climate to DC firms or Sacramento firms or what have you, and taken it out of the hands of union organizers and Lions clubs and Elks lodges. And the most effective campaigns are ones that are able to tap into that same stream of local activism that has been dying. So that book is a very valuable tool in doing that. I'm going to go back to Bethany, who was the test case on this getting involved locally. She was on the Parks Committee. She was involved in a local community group. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is. After her victory, where she received her 49% of the vote, you also have to look for other victories. She was appointed to serve on the Zoning and Planning Board, and most recently, as of yesterday, served on what Wyoming calls the coroner's inquest boards. Whenever there's a police shooting, they convene, the coroner of the county or the city convenes an inquest board, and the inquest board hears the evidence and decides whether or not it was justified, the shooting was justified. In Riverton, Wyoming, last month, there was a shooting involving an ATF agent, and Bethany was appointed to that inquest board. So we had a Libertarian sitting on the inquest board for whether or not a police action was justified. Those are the kinds of huge changes that can be made just by being involved in your community. Once you've identified your history, the next thing is you need to have your targeted messaging. Targeted messaging needs to be tested. And if you're not testing your messaging, then odds are you're only speaking to a core audience. And your core audience, your base, another way of saying that, is not going to get you there. Especially as a libertarian. Our base is 3%, maybe. If we're lucky, our base is 3%. So you need to have a message that's going to appeal to be able to get you that 50.1. We have to be coalition builders. So when you put together that message, you need to immediately put that out to testing through focus groups and through polling and adapt your message accordingly. That all comes into timeline, so you have to do this prior to announcing. This is not after you announce. If you do any of the prep after you've announced your campaign, you're too late. So prior to your announcement, you build your messaging, you test your messaging, and you put it on. You send it to your designers, put it onto some test flyers, put it onto some test images, and see if you can't get that, or if you can get something solid before you announce your campaign. I promise I'll get to the more interesting stuff in a moment. I just need to get all this technical stuff out of the way. The next thing that you're going to want to do is start recruiting your team. Okay, you're going to need to get the campaign flow chart put together where you have clear directives for everybody that you put on your team. And this one's very important for libertarians. When you're hiring a staff, libertarians often like to go to their friends or fellow delegates who have similar experience, not having any idea how the hell to run a campaign. So you hire your buddy who sat next to you at the breakfast at convention and say, hey, you want to be my campaign manager? Well, what does that person really know about being a campaign manager? That it really matters that your staff is quality. Otherwise, you're all bumping around in the dark and you have no way of knowing where you're going. So I advise libertarians, as sometimes unpopular as this advice is, to seek out some professional consulting advice when you're hiring your staff, because if you are using your buddy from the convention, you're likely not going to win. So I think it's very important that you reach out to professional organizations to try to identify liberty-leaning consultants who are willing to help you identify staffers who can put together a successful campaign. Make sure that your communications person knows how to spell. Use proper grammar. That's something else the libertarians have a little bit of a shortcoming in. We're very eager. We're innovators. We're excited. We're very eager people. So we run out, we launch our campaign, and then we bring on all of our buddies to run our campaign, and then we run it right into the ground. Eager's good, but just do it the right way. So make sure that your communications director has the skills necessary. Make sure that your field and operations team understand how to run data operations CRM software. Make sure that they've had experience working and cultivating data. Otherwise, the results of the data you're getting from your field organization are going to be corrupted. They need to be able to train your canvassers on how to use, let's say I use eCanvasser for many of our campaigns because it's affordable. If you don't have a staffer that's able to properly train your canvassers on your CRM program, the data that you're going to get back is going to be inaccurate. It's going to be overly optimistic. It's going to put you in a false sense of complacency. It's going to take your resources into places it doesn't need to go. So your operations team need to have some experience with CRM and data cultivation. And that's the segue into successful turnout intervention is what they call it. So turnout intervention is the actual activity of connecting with a single voter on a personal level and getting them to vote. A person who is knocked on their door and has a personal conversation. It doesn't have to be long. It can be 2 minutes. But if you're able to interact with somebody personally, connect with them personally, they are almost twice as likely to alter their voting pattern to voting for you. So there was a controlled study that was done in 2014. This study took a random control sample of people who had been canvassed, as well as scheduled canvassers who were designed to secret shop the canvassers. And to the control group, if they were given a scripted candidate or a canvasser with a script, a very strict script, get through it in 2 minutes, nothing more, nothing less, just get the information out. It's no better or more effective than a campaign ad. No more effective. 21% of people surveyed in the control group who had been canvassed said that they either remembered the canvas, remembered the name of the candidate who they canvassed for, or ended up voting for that person. Only 21%. Now, without the script, with proper training from your team, that jumped up to 41%. 41% of the tested control group said that they remembered, based off of not trying to regurgitate a script and shove it down your throat. So it's very important that the quality of your ground team is good. Now, there is that same study showed that $1.2 billion was spent on television and radio advertisements, to about $306 million spent on field organizations, even though consistently we know that field organization and canvassing is significantly more effective than radio and television. There's a couple reasons for that we need to avoid, and this comes back to your staffing. If you have a staffer, if you have a campaign manager who is coming to you and saying that I want to be paid on bottom line of your ad buy, they want a percentage of your ad buy, then odds are that campaign manager is going to spend a lot more money on ad buys than they are on your ground game. So when a campaign manager approaches you, you're going to want to try to negotiate something that's not in the ad buy percentages, because that will drive up ad buy costs, which is not good. If you shifted a percentage, they say about only a third of the percentage of money that is spent on ad buys and shifted it to the field, we would be able to see that 21% increase to that 41% value, and that's called voter intervention. Or that's called voter intervention. If you're able to intervene early in these canvassing, that also creates habits for your voters, who will come out and vote and be more likely to vote for Libertarians, which will basically, like a house of cards, lead to more quality Libertarian candidates. Hiring field operatives is also something that you should use in your campaign before you're going to before you decide to buy radio or television ads. You can hire a campaign canvasser for roughly between $15 and $20. I'm not sure, Boomer, what's your cost here in California? Yeah, that's good. In rural areas where it's more difficult to find, you tend to have to pay more. California, you might be in a better position because there's a lot more people, a lot more of a labor pool. But in labor shortage areas, it's between $15 and $20 for average to be able to secure that. So if you shift some of your money, about 30% over to your ad buy, from your ad buys over to canvassing, you can fill out a pretty good organization, and that's far more valuable. So before you listen to a consultant that's telling you to do ad buys, make sure that you have a full and effective and healthy ground operation, because it's the only thing that really matters. Now, at this point, I was going to open up to questions. and answer questions for anybody that might have any. I'm far better at answering questions than presenting. I just am. Not a teacher. Right. Well, social media is incredibly important. It's increasing in importance. There are very few studies actually that show on how valuable, on how tangible the value of social media is. There's very few studies on it. It is clearly valuable. I mean, there are campaigns that I know of who have won campaigns without knocking a single door, who have done what they call digital canvassing. For me, the verdict's out on whether or not that's an effective thing, where there's zero door knocking and going. I don't think that that's terribly effective, but they swear by it. There's an entire faction in the Republican Party that believe it. Social media is terribly valuable. It's just my emphasis going from convention to convention is the door knocking, because it is the most traditional and effective tool that's overlooked. People think that they don't have to do it. I think I already said the numbers, but I'll repeat them because I think that it bears repeating. For every 13 doors that you knock, you get 1 vote. For every 38 phone calls that you make that's effective, successful phone calls that you make, you get 1 vote. There is no data that we know of. Right. There's no terribly good data on social media, so it's hard for me to stand up and give a lot of statistical numbers. There are current studies being done, but it takes a while. It takes multiple election cycles, and it's still, as far as it's incredibly valuable. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, they're incredibly powerful. And as our former presidential candidate would often say, is we have the most powerful tool that we've ever seen throughout history right in our pocket. It's the most powerful tool for education right in our pocket. And that's very true. I would recommend staying afterward and listening to the social media talk that's happening right after this. My number one thing, I'm field focused is where I come from. It's field and strategy. I tend to hire out my social media because that's not my specialty. I don't even personally have an Instagram. So, I'm not the social media person to ask. Just make sure you hire somebody good. Because there's no question that it increases name recognition. Do we know the numbers? Not terribly well right now. We do know that it is a successful voter strategy to interfere with voters. I mean, it's terribly important, but yeah. That's great. Robocalls are incredible. They're not very effective. The most effective use of a robocall is for event promotion. Event promotion is the only area that researchers have really shown that it's not enough to create voter fatigue, but it does have a statistical significance to increasing the number of the turnout for an event. So it does have some value in events, but robocalls are very ineffective. It does say that they are. If it's not the candidate, if it's a surrogate, they're slightly more effective. So if you have a libertarian celebrity, if Penn Jillette makes a robocall for you, it's going to be more effective than if Gary Johnson were to make a robocall. So robocalls are I would not recommend spending the money. I would say hire an extra canvasser, save the money, and hire an extra canvasser to go out and knock on doors. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, again, something that has to fund, this would be a deal something that's kind of budget.
I actually don't think that it's a matter of budget. I mean, to a degree. I mean, if you have an unlimited budget, I think that I don't think there's a software that's the end all be all. It was Nation Builder for a while. Now I feel like it's kind of archaic. I don't think that it's adapted very well. i360 is a very good system. Right now, it's considered to be one of the pinnacle systems that we, people have access to. For an affordable campaign, it was eCanvasser last year, but eCanvasser was also in its beta testing format. That has changed, and I'm really enjoying the movement that they're making, but their cost has gone up. Last year it was $49 for 5,000 names. Now it's $150 for, I think, 10,000 names. So the price is, what was that? Per month. But this is per month. So the costs have gone up rather dramatically. I would say a good one-size-fits-all. If the if the alternative is an Excel spreadsheet, then use eCanvasser. It's a very simple, very user-friendly system. If you can afford it, I would probably recommend something like i360, something like along those lines. Nathan. They do not. Mm-hmm. Theirs was actually 42. The Gerber and Green study was 42. This is a Princeton study from 2014. Mm-hmm. No. Connections. The Alan Green, or the Alan Gerber and whatever Green one, it was solely persuasion and voter intervention. That was, yeah. I am not familiar terribly with what the Republicans did in California, if they did anything well in California at all. Well, the Democrats, for field in California specifically, or nationwide? Okay. Well, no, I'm not familiar with anything specifically in California. What I am familiar with is nationwide, the organizations that they do use. The Democrats have been exceptionally effective at interacting with minority communities and canvassing and communicating with minority communities. Something that Republicans are catching up on, but it's something that the Libertarians aren't even considering. And I think it's actually a positive thing that we're considering. I don't think that, unlike the Republicans, I don't think there's a fear of the minority communities in the Libertarian movement as there is in the Republican Party. So nationwide, I would say that the Democrats have, I'm caught off guard by your question. No, I can't answer that question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, this is important. And actually, this is something that Andy worked on one of my canvassing teams, and I am very, very partial to not walking before 1 p.m. I think 1 p.m. is already pushing it for fairly early. There are a lot of campaigns that like to Saturdays you can go slightly earlier, but it's not terribly effective. You're going to want to try to hit it between the 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. hour when people are home. There is something to be said of, if you take a look at your data and you see a significantly higher number of graveyard workers, or if there's a large number of unemployed folks, then you can alter your hours incrementally. But for the most part, you're going to want to do it after 4 p.m. Any others? Yeah. Okay, so I actually mean voter intervention. So that means you have to have the conversation with the voter. Okay, so what you're talking about, if they don't answer, it's called lit drop, and it's about for every 68 lit drops, effective lit drops, and that's from the Gerber Green study. 68 effective reads of a piece of literature can get you 1 vote. But actually communicating with the person, it's about 13. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, that's considered an interaction. Now, there are a lot of methods, and that's why you need to have a field person that's able to train them on how to get around those. Surprisingly, if you look at the statistics on it, there are fewer negative interactions for somebody canvassing politically than there is for somebody going door to door selling vacuums. For the most part, it's actually it's a dying art in a lot of areas. You know, using Utah, using California as an example, in the heavily Democratic, heavily Republican areas, the canvassing is not often used because it's not a competitive race. So there's very little voter fatigue in the extremely competitive districts. So one of the things I'll say about libertarians, when you're looking for your race, people automatically assume, let's look for the competitive races, where the Republicans only getting 52%, or the Democrats only getting 52%, and the Democrats getting the 48%. For libertarians, I think that we should look at more extreme situations, where the Republicans getting 70%, or the Democrats getting 70%. Because the voter fatigue is low often. The apathy is usually high, so there's a larger pool of people that you can pull out to vote in areas where that's not where there's not that kind of competition happening, and you can attack them. We have that really fun ability. You can attack them from the left and the right. So if you're running against a heavily entrenched Democrat, you can attack them from the left, which is surprising them that they're not expecting. Same with the Republicans on the financial right. So I would recommend going to areas where it's extremely lopsided, and you're not going to have as many negative interactions at the door, first of all. Yeah, Boomer. Well, there's three phases of there's three commonly used phases of a canvassing team. The first phase is identification phase, and that's when you're going to be walking around and identifying your voters, if they're going to be part of your base, how likely they are, how frequently they do vote. This is where it's comparable to the data that Yes eCanvasser does not have. It does not have the interface to be able to really explore voter history, voter data history. But it just depends on the round. If for our second round for Bethany, for example, we dropped the hard absolutely voting for Miller, we're absolutely voting for the opponent. So it's just a matter of dedication, making sure that you get your data, making sure that you cultivate your data in a way that you can shrink the numbers of people that you're communicating with over time. Does that answer your question to a degree? So you're talking about, well, you mean strategies on who you're going to target, like to identify which voters? Right. Well, I think that it depends on the campaign as well. So if you're dealing with a campaign where there's a lot of undecideds, if you're dealing with a lot of people that there's not very much name recognition with your opponent, then you're going to be your persuasion is going to be far more important than your activation. Okay, so then you're going to identify your voters who are saying, I haven't heard of either candidate. Then those are the vote. You're obviously going to want to go for those people. If you're running into a disproportionately larger number of people that are saying I'm voting for a candidate A, then you're going to shift it to activation. Then you're going to want to go to activating your base and competing that way. Because if your persuasion universe is small, then you're not going to be working on the persuasion narrative. It's more activation narrative, which is it's hard to gauge. That's why you need good strategists. That's why it can't just be your buddy from convention who's your campaign manager, because they don't know. They know just as much as you. So the idea that you need somebody who knows the strategy and has some familiarity with some strategies is important. Yeah. Oklahoma and Illinois. Mm-hmm. To interfere with, I do know. So he told me that. So this is for Chris Powell, who's their political director in Oklahoma, made a comment to me that they had he used an ordinance to try to prevent some sort of canvassing operation. So there was some sort of municipal tactic to try to stop canvassing. There are plenty of Supreme Court rules that work, that you have every right to canvass. The Supreme Court has ruled multiple times political canvassing is protected free speech. They can't even stop you from canvassing in a gated community, provided you don't have to break through the grate to get in. The Supreme Court's very, very clear on their decisions, that you can canvass. That's a tactical decision you need to make, though, because a lot of people really don't like to be canvassed in their. There's a reason they're in a gated community. So there's a tactical choice you have to make whether you can or not. But in his particular instance, I think that good legal counsel would have probably been the better solution than what they ended up obviously being successful. But I think that they could have shut down that challenge with some good legal counsel, because they could have very easily challenged that ordinance. Yeah, they did, and he worked around it, which speaks to his ingenuity. But I think that there were probably easier ways. Yeah. Huh? It's always very wise to have legal counsel. Cost range. You can get a very affordable lawyer. You can get a very expensive lawyer. It just depends on your comfort with them. But I do think it's important for probably state legislative and above to consult attorneys when you're dealing with almost anything on campaign finance. Consulting attorneys when you're dealing with if there's an ordinance that was passed by your city council that says that you're not allowed to campaign, that's something you'd want to go after. But on the lower level, the most you would really need an attorney for is compliance. I would say, depending on the campaign, at a lower level, probably 5% at most. Presidential elections get pretty. You can spend a pretty significant portion of your budget, 12 to 15% of your budget, on legal fees at the high end. It shouldn't break the bank. If your lawyers are breaking the bank, then you've either done something really wrong or you've hired the wrong lawyer. Right. Right. Andy, do you have a question? Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm gonna answer this in a two-part question. One with an anecdote and one with a more analytical approach. First, the anecdotal approach is with Bethany's race, which is, I use that race because it was a very effective partisan race. I'm very happy for Jeff, but the partisan races are an incredibly different animal. But as far as this theory that there's a lot of untapped voters, that's true, but we're not the only ones that have noticed that. It's not like the Democrats and Republicans haven't noticed that there's a lot of people that don't vote, and they have a lot more money and a lot more resources to get those people to vote. Research has showed that there's not most of those voters are not voting because they don't have an option. It's because they really just don't give a damn. They'd rather be doing whatever else that they're doing. They just really don't care. So there is something to be said about trying to chase those votes. For instance, in a state like Utah, where in some midterm elections there's only 17% of the voters that turn out, obviously there's a swath of voters that you can try to persuade. But in areas where there's really high efficacy, it can be a waste of resources to try to go after those voters. However, your strategy needs to be all-encompassing, because in Bethany's race, we did one canvass where we were just focusing on absentee voters. One canvass, just absentee. We knocked only the doors of people who did mail-in votes. And I'm very happy we did that, but I think that it was a little too late. We did it 3 days before the ballots hit. That wasn't enough time. And I think that you need to have a comprehensive strategy for every pool of voters, and that includes non-voters. But I think that it can be a huge black hole of resources. I know it can be a huge black hole of resources. Democrats have spent outrageous sums of money trying to get people who don't vote out to vote, and they just can't get it. They just can't convince them to vote. The only things that really get people to vote are controversies, fear, hate. Love is far less effective at getting people to vote. Hope is far less effective at getting people to vote. It's hate, it's fear. It's xenophobia, as we're seeing right now. It's cultural battles. Social issues are far more effective. Pocketbooks are good. Our pocketbook issues, deficits, economy, those kind of messaging are terribly effective at getting established habitual voters out. Very good. But those non-voters, you're going to need a nice red meat, nasty social issue. That's the only way you're going to get those people out to vote. Medical marijuana is great. Anytime there's a medical marijuana initiative or now recreational initiative on the ballot, that's when you should run Libertarians, because that gets people out. There's a lot of people who are very passionate about that issue, but for the most part, it's very, very difficult to capture the lightning in the bottle and being Bernie Sanders. So, yeah. Yeah, it is disturbing, and there's a couple of folks that really believe that we were cheated out of that election. I tend to think that it was our failure and not a cheat. Okay, I think that those were 500 ballots that had not been counted. For the first few months, I would stay quiet and let people think, let people brood and come to terms with it, and think that we were cheated. I don't think we were cheated. I think that we failed. And I think that it's very easy, especially for libertarians, to find conspiracies on voting that aren't there. I wanted to believe that Julie Freeze, the county clerk of Fremont County, stuffed a bag of ballots and counted them. I wanted to believe that. But I don't think it's common. I don't think voter fraud is common. I don't think we were cheated. I think we should have knocked more doors on our absentees. I think that we should have called those elderly voters. I think that we should have contacted seasonal voters who had already left town, because the population of Wyoming drops in half in the winter. And we should have been more effective at outreaching to those people who were going to leave, that were never going to hear our message. If you look at Amber's, I'm going to go back to that research or that study that we were doing on what libertarians did in Amber's race, which was the control race on the 1, 2, 3 door knocks. On the areas that we only knocked once, she got 3%. We only knocked our absentees one time, so we probably got 3 to 15%. And we needed 20 to hold on to the lead. So I don't think it's a widespread concern, and I definitely don't think that we should be discouraged from running effective and successful campaigns because of the risk of ballot harvesting or the risk of some sort of voter fraud. I think that that's an excuse that we're using not to run effective and good candidates. I don't trust the government as much as anybody in this room, but I really don't think that they're doing that in a widespread way. You know why? Because we're not competitive. Why the hell would they do that when we can't even get 3%? So, any other questions? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It sucked. It really sucked. It was, I mean, we were celebrating and the media had called it. It was really, really great. But, and when that rug gets ripped out from underneath you, it really is discouraging. But you just got to get back on the horse, because I really don't think they cheated us. So we just got to try harder, which we are. One thing that's happened in Wyoming since, because that was a really downer conversation I just had. I'm going to upper it a little bit. As of Monday, we will now have the Libertarian, or the vice mayor. Next year, it's a soft mayor system, so or a weak mayor system. So next year, we will have the second largest city in Wyoming is Casper, and the vice mayor of the council has always been registered unaffiliated. He's always attended our conventions, but will officially be becoming a Libertarian and announcing his bid for our state representative seat in Wyoming. This is the third official to flip. This is a party that just 2 years ago was virtually non-existent. It was a party that has 0 county affiliates and had 68 national dues-paying members. 68. I mean, nothing. And now they have 3 county affiliates. They have elected officials who have flipped or were elected. There was one person that was recently elected to a parks audit board that was a Libertarian in Wyoming. It's amazing how these small victories, what happened with Jeff, why am I in California and not in any other state? I'm speaking at my home state, Wyoming and California. It's the only places that I want to go because we had somebody who was so close or in positions of victory. This makes it real. We're changing the narrative to libertarians can win elections rather than we're just the spoiler. A very dangerous thing, by the way, is never allow anybody to say that you covered the spread in an election. That discourages, that very much enforces the idea that we're spoilers and not winners. We're changing the narrative with Jeff, with Bethany. We are winnable, myself and Kara. Kara's an elected libertarian in Minnesota. I'm an elected libertarian in Utah. We had 63 elected libertarians last year. So far, we already have 8 this year with special elections. We're moving up. We are creating a bench. This is what we've been asking for a very long time. We're finally there. So let's keep pushing it. And that's what you need to do is identify those races. And where are you guys from? Are you guys from the north? Los Angeles? No, that's... I mean, that's a place, but there's some good areas in the interior of Southern California where you have some good opportunities that you can help with. That's something else is if your opportunities are not in your city, you're in the heart of Salt Lake City, if you're in the heart of Cheyenne, if you're in the heart of Los Angeles, don't abandon your city, but if there's a good race next door, there's a good race down the street or an hour away, send some resources, help them fundraise, go knock some doors, because we do have to do this collectively because there is not the institutions available like there used to be. We need to be sure that we're helping our neighbors. Andy. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we all know what happened with Laura, and we all know what happened with Brandon and the other Caleb. Thank you. When you're an elected that flips, they're going to come much harder against you. They're going to attack you much harder because it shows their weakness. It's embarrassing. The resources are really going to pour in to fight you on it. For this race, for this particular skid, for instance, he has a very good chance. He's been elected 4 times to the city. He's currently serving. He will be the mayor when he's running, and there's a lot of incumbency benefit to it. You need to use your incumbency. A lot of libertarians, something that Laura did well, but a little bit too narrow of a focus, was using that incumbency to do town halls, using that incumbency to in federal races, franking privileges, and in very few states, I think 9 states allow them a similar franking privilege where you can send mail just by signing your signature up on the top corner of the envelope. You need to really take advantage of those avenues with Sean. His name's Sean Johnson, this vice mayor in Casper. We're going to be aggressively trying to push some agendas on the city council that will bring some issues to the forefront that we can run on. So use your incumbency to identify weaknesses in the system that you can campaign on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's another subjective formula, but for the most part, it's different for candidates than it is for your canvassers. Your canvassers are going to want to spend a much briefer amount of time at the door than your candidates are going to want to. Now, most people say about 2 minutes, but my problem is that we're starting to see a trend of canvassing teams and field operatives who are more focused on the amount of doors that we're hitting and less focused on the quality of doors that we're hitting. One of the races, the one that Andy worked on with me, was all about getting the numbers. That was the strategy that the campaign wanted. Okay, they just wanted us to hit every door. They didn't care how. They didn't care how long we spent or what we said. They just wanted to knock on every door. And that's kind of a growing problem. And what that does is campaign managers and field operatives will be really pushing their canvassers to try to keep it below 30 seconds, try to keep it below a minute so that you can get those doors. But really, if you look at the research, if you look at actual anecdotal evidence, it's far more effective to have 2 longer conversations in the same time frame that you could have 10 brief conversations. to be able to turn those voters out. Because again, what we're trying to do is voter intervention. This is not about just trying to. We don't need to remind voters. We don't need to remind our base. We need to vote for us. So for us, I think that the focus on longer conversations is okay. However, I'm in a libertarian room, so I'm going to clarify and I'm going to put some caveats on this. Your issues need to be narrowed and focused and tested. You can't just get up there and be like, I just really think we should fund our own roads. No more taxes, and let's legalize heroin. That's probably not going to be the system, not going to be the message that you're going to want to open the door with. So you're going to need a tested message and a script, but you're also going to want to train your canvassers effectively to be able to have interpersonal interactions with each of the people that are at the door. So this is a matter of interpersonal interaction while also using a tested, tried and true methods to stick to your campaign goals. Okay, so yes, longer conversations are valuable, provided that the quality of the conversation is solid. We're very loquacious people. We're very intense people. And I don't think those are bad things, and I think it's what makes us good governors. There's been articles about Jeff. There's been articles we're very good at actually governing when we get in there. But we've got to condense our message to something that's effective. So I would say, to answer your question with an actual figure, I would say 2 minutes is a good average for a communication. Because the other thing that you're going to run into is people don't want to talk to you at the door. But you need to try to get them to talk to you at the door, because it is intimidating for canvassers, and a lot of them will just spit out so they'll get up and say, have you heard of candidate X? Have you heard about Jeff Hewitt? And they'll say yes or no, and then they'll start shutting your door. And for a while, this is a weird little thing, the Democrats were telling you to shove your foot in the door. I'll never do that. But they were actually telling them to do that. But you've got to rhetorically put your foot in the door somehow in a way that's not invasive to their space or their time. So 2 minutes is a good goal. For a candidate, it could be a very long time. Never look like that they're not important to you. Never look like you're trying to shut down. You've taken the time to knock on their door. They've taken the time out of their life to continue to converse with you. Never make it look like you're too busy to talk to them. So even though you are. Any others? Yeah. She gave a brilliant speech at the last legislative session in front of the government subcommittees. And she waxed poetic about how there has never been, America's the only country that there's never been voter fraud, and that the immense amount of pressure that her office has been under has been harassment of a government official, and she's the best county. She was very Trumpian in her speech. She's the best county clerk that's ever been in Wyoming, and the only reason she didn't run for governor is because of how important it is that she stay in her job as county clerk. So, and she was successful. There was new legislation that passed that allowed. There was a little bit of vagueness in the law that allowed the county clerks to count absentee ballots alone, with only one witness of their pick. And that was kind of the method by which they were doing it, but it wasn't codified. She was successful. It is now codified. They only need one witness, and they can pick their witness, and they can do it closed doors. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So at the local level, you identify a financial issue, something that's impacting the pocketbooks, every single time. The candidates that we were able to have the highest results for, which Bethany wasn't the only one that broke records, by the way. Gideon Oaks also broke records. Sid Dowd broke records of the people that we worked with. There was a number of candidates that broke records, and almost every time it was a pocketbook issue, something that was impacting them directly in the pocketbooks. But that only really works on a larger scale if the economy is bad. When the economy is good, those issues really don't resonate very well. So on a local level, find taxes. That was the easiest. We're going to lower taxes, or I refuse to raise taxes. Wyoming was incredibly effective at saying that they wanted to start an income tax. In South Dakota, we were able to say that they wanted to eliminate their tax on hotel rooms, the transient tax, and they were going to replace it with an income tax. That was effective. So it's a scare tactic. We're going to take, they're going to take more of your money. I'm going to let you keep more of your money. That's an incredibly effective message. On the higher levels, you're going to have to get into some social issues, and it's unfortunate. Wedge issues are the only way that you can really convince too many voters. As it is, maybe there's innovation. I'm always hoping for innovation in politics that makes it less so, but social issues on a higher level. If I were to pick two, taxes and it depends on your race. Here in California, maybe criminal justice reform would probably be a fairly effective one. Western states, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, it would be public lands. It's not a very controversial issue, but people really get worked up about it. Yeah, it's a very, very, very strong issue in the Western United States, and it's not quite an abortion or gay rights or trans rights or anything like that that's going to isolate you from your voters. So it's a good vote. So what you're looking for is an issue that's going to excite people without turning off too many other people, is basically what it is. So any others? I think I'm approaching the end of my time. I have about 4 minutes left. So basically, I'll just do a quick summation of what I've talked about. I'm basically going around telling people to knock doors. That's basically what I'm here to tell you. It's boring and you've heard it before, but the value of what I have said is that we actually have evidence that shows that it works. So while you've heard this from a lot of people, we have libertarians that have come so close that they could smell the victory, and it was based totally on the retail side of politics. I cannot emphasize it enough. When I first contacted the targeted races that we worked with, I told them they had to walk. I told them again they had to walk. I really, really emphasized that they had to walk. And then when I finally showed up on the ground, I asked them how many doors they had knocked, and they had knocked 50 in a month. And they thought that was a lot. I mean, knock. You have to knock 50 in a night, and that's low. So that's what I'm here to tell you. Knock doors, focus on your field, pull some of that money away from your... Social media is incredibly important. And I would highly recommend you stay around and listen to the folks in this talk after about social media. It's not my forte. Hire good social media folks and knock your doors. That's what I would have to say. So thank you very much for listening to my speech. Have a good day.